So let's do the regenerativity pattern. I'll read the heart description and then talk about some thoughts that I've had about this pattern with you. So the heart description says, life involves ongoing movement toward new forms of wholeness, vitality, and functionality. Illness, degradation, and dysfunction call forth energies for healing, transformation, and emergence. So nurture resilience and become conscious participants in regenerative dynamics that transform depletion, damage, and dysfunction into renewal, discovery, and life-enhancing development. So that's what the heart says. And the more I've thought about this since creating the heart, the more I found it useful to make a distinction here. I'm doing a three-part distinction. Various people do, 2 or 3 or 4, 6-part distinctions, but I particularly like this starkness of this between extractive dynamics, sustainable dynamics, and regenerative dynamics. And for extractive dynamics, basically the motto is get what I can from me and mine. There's a take energy, accumulate, waste, toxify, socialize costs while privatizing benefits. Life is a commodity and an unlimited resource for profit and consumption, and we are separate from each other. We are separate from nature. We are fundamentally separate entities. So that's the assumption and dynamics that go on with extractive worldview. And then there's sustainable dynamics and the sustainability worldview. And it's funny, it's like the what the physicians have, the do no harm Hippocratic oath seems to be at the heart of this. We have done so much extractive engagement with nature and each other that it's no longer sustainable. The harms are too great. So it's like, stop, do no harm, respect nature's limits and cycles. And it's life as an environment that we live in and we need to be responsible for. And it's a limited resource or full of limited resources that we should use sparingly. We are dependent, this is the assumption. Instead of being separate, we are dependent, we are linked. Nature and humanity need to be cared for in order to enable them to serve us. The idea that we can engage with nature in ways that allow future generations to meet their needs. We meet our needs, they meet their needs. There's still human welfare is central, but we're more conscious. We're recycling, we're reusing, we're internalizing outcomes, closing feedback loops that have been left open by the extractive perspective. We're stewarding and being prudent, simple living, whatever, localize. We're trying to minimize our ecological footprint, our carbon footprint, all our impacts. And it's still this profit, we're including profit. There's a distinction between weak sustainability and strong sustainability. And weak sustainability is we want sustainable development, with the ideal being the way Western people live, the way Western economies operate. And we want to do that with more concern for the environment and for people. That's the weak sustainability. Strong sustainability is we need to transform our economics, our technical systems, our politics, everything into lower impact ways that have already existed for hundreds and thousands of years, and the idea that, still that life is an environment. This is where we get our ability to live, is from the environment, and it's limited. We can't abuse it. So the third one is regenerative dynamics, and this is more radical shift than I realized earlier in my engagement with this worldview. And it's sort of like join nature's resilient community of aliveness. You know, life is a vibrant community of relatedness, of co-creative partnerships and mutual support. And it's worthy of at least respect, caring, and commitment and engagement, more deeply of love, communication, co-creativity, celebration. We are family. We are all co-creators of each other's worlds. This is the all my relations, indigenous perspective. Nature is alive. Even rocks and mountains are alive. They deserve respect, engagement. There's a level of communication that is available should we wish to tap into it. Communication with trees, communication, to say nothing of communication with each other, partnership with each other, the sense of brotherhood we have with each other, sisterhood, we are family, this sense that what we're basically doing is co-creating aliveness, restoring, healing, replenishing, renewing, revitalizing, all of that. We're dealing with aliveness. We're dealing with restoring things, healing things, replenishing, revitalizing, renewing, all this, bringing aliveness to, and an engagement, live engagement where we sense our relation to and we are actively relating to. Things aren't commodities. People aren't just aren't citizens, consumers, producers, whatever. These are real, unique lives, and we're to appreciate them, respect them, help them and their human communities and natural communities be resilient and adaptable, and celebrate the life, enhance the dynamics there, the ability to for emergent things to show up, fit things together, synergize them, ecologize them. That's another word I sort of stumbled into, weave them into living wholes that you are part of. There's a co-evolution of, we are all working towards the benefiting of all life, all living things, aliveness in and for all things. There's a participatory partnership, co-creative, fundamental assumption underlying this, and a sense of community. And Daniel Christian Wall, who's one of the leading current voices on that, on this perspective, talks about the community of life creates conditions conducive to life. And we need to rejoin that community. All ecologists understand that all the elements of ecosystems are, in a very real sense, working together to create the conditions for them all to flourish. And we can have a role in that if we choose to. And the whole, it's not just life cycle, it's cycles of aliveness. And it applies, in a funny way, most fundamentally to our relations with nature, but most directly to our relations with each other, and to our communities, the communities that we're part of. What is it like to come from a participatory place of relatedness, of respect, of appreciation, and perhaps most basically co-creation? We are all co-creating what happens next. We are all co-creating the conditions that we all live in. We are co-creating each other in really fundamental ways. So this is a mindset and a worldview. It's a life practice, something to grow into as each of us individually and in groups and communities. It's a design practice. People who design agricultural systems, people who design houses and communities. How do you do it in a spirit of participation, co-creation, and respect? And There's the technologies. There's technologies that are extractive, technologies that are sustainable, technologies that are regenerative, that bring more life into whatever the situation is. So that's where this is coming from. It's actually very big, very broad, and it helps to hold what's going on with extractive dynamics. We see a lot of that all around us, and fundamental. The idea of unlimited growth, of profit, of using nature and other people as resources. That whole consciousness is very different from sustainable, which is respecting people's and nature's limits, not doing harm. And beyond that is regenerativity and resilience and aliveness, and participating in that and playing our role in regenerating over and over again and enhancing the aliveness of the systems and people and life forms that we are engaged with.